April 24th, 1925. Pullman Car and Manufacturing Corporation, Chicago, Illinois. The steel frame of dining car 3164 rolls off the assembly line, its riveted hull gleaming under the factory lights. Inside, craftsmen are installing rich mahogany paneling, polished brass fixtures, and linen-covered tables that will seat 36 passengers. This isn't just a railroad car. It's a restaurant on wheels, designed to serve impeccable 5-course meals while hurtling through the American landscape at speeds approaching 100 miles per hour. For the next 45 years, this car, and thousands like it, will define what it means to dine in motion, a marriage of culinary excellence and mechanical precision that turned every journey into an occasion. Welcome to the golden age of railroad dining, when stepping into the diner meant stepping into a world of silver service, starched linens, and impossible logistics. The dining car wasn't born overnight. It emerged from decades of trial, error, and the relentless discomfort of early rail travel. In the 1830s, when America's first passenger trains began rolling across the young nation's expanding rail network, the concept of eating while traveling was virtually non-existent. Trains made brief stops at station restaurants, grimy establishments where passengers had exactly 20 minutes to wolf down whatever greasy fare the proprietor happened to be serving that day. The food was bad, the service was worse, and if you weren't fast enough, the train left without you. George Pullman understood this problem better than anyone. The 19th century industrialist had built his fortune creating sleeping cars that brought hotel-level comfort to overnight journeys. But comfort while sleeping was only half the battle. Passengers still needed to eat, and Pullman saw an opportunity. In 1866, his company unveiled the hotel car, a revolutionary concept that combined sleeping quarters with a small kitchen. The kitchen measured just 3 feet by 6 feet, barely larger than a closet, and was operated by a crew of 4 or 5 who somehow managed to prepare basic meals in this impossibly cramped space. There was a wine closet, a pantry, and additional beer and wine stored beneath the floorboards. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Passengers could now eat hot food without leaving the train. 2 years later, Pullman changed everything. On a spring morning in 1868, the first true dining car, named the Delmonico, after New York City's most acclaimed restaurant, entered service. This wasn't a cramped hotel car with a glorified hot plate. This was a full-scale restaurant spanning an entire railroad car, featuring 2 separate dining rooms flanking a central kitchen. The Delmonico could seat 36 guests at a time, served by a staff of at least 7, and often more than 10, including cooks, waiters, and busboys. The car itself screamed luxury. Thick carpets muffled the clatter of wheels on rails. Elaborate light, fixtures cast warm glows over tables draped in expensive linens. Draperies framed windows that offered panoramic views of the passing countryside. Upholstered chairs provided genuine comfort. The kitchenware was of the finest quality, and the china bore the Pullman crest. This wasn't just a place to eat. It was a statement. Rail travel had become civilized. The menu was extraordinary. With a full kitchen staff working in synchronized rhythm, the Delmonico could prepare virtually anything a fine restaurant could offer. Roasted meats, rich soups, fresh salads, warm bread, elaborate desserts, and cocktails, plenty of cocktails. The logistics were staggering. Every ingredient had to be loaded at specific stations along the route. Ice for the refrigerators, fresh produce, cuts of meat, cases of wine and spirits. The kitchen crew worked in perpetual motion, preparing dishes while the train swayed, lurched, and occasionally jolted over imperfect track. And yet they made it work. But not everyone was convinced. Despite the Delmonico's success, many railroad companies resisted investing in dining cars. The economics were brutal. These cars were expensive to build, costly to maintain, and required large staffs that needed constant training and management. Early dining cars often operated at a loss. Railroad executives looked at the balance sheets and hesitated. What changed their minds was competition. In 1889, the Union Pacific Railroad announced it would operate dining cars on its transcontinental routes, breaking an informal agreement with the Burlington Railroad not to do so. The message was clear. Passengers preferred trains with dining service, and if one company offered it, others would lose business. This was only 20 years after the Golden Spike ceremony that completed the first transcontinental railroad, and competition for passengers was already fierce. First-class travelers would invariably choose a line with a dining car over one without. By 1889, most major American railroads operated dining cars. The Golden Age had begun. The 1890s and early 1900s saw rapid innovation. Railroad companies competed not just on speed and comfort, but on the quality of their dining service. Each line boasted better food, finer service, and more opulent interiors than their rivals. The Pennsylvania Railroad's Broadway Limited featured dining cars with ornate woodwork and crystal chandeliers. The New York Central's 20th Century Limited countered with Art Deco elegance and celebrity chefs. The Santa Fe Railway introduced Southwestern flair with Native American-inspired decor and regional specialties. The competition drove standards higher and higher. By the 1920s, dining car service had reached levels of sophistication that would make modern travelers weep with envy. Consider the typical dining experience on a premier train, like the 20th Century Limited in 1928. You enter the dining car through heavy doors that seal behind you, muffling the rhythmic clatter of the rails. The maitre d', impeccably dressed in a dark suit, greets you by name if you're a regular, or with practiced courtesy if you're new. He escorts you to a table covered in crisp white linen, where polished silverware gleams in the soft light of overhead fixtures. The windows beside you frame the Hudson River Valley, its forested hills rolling past at 60 miles per hour. A waiter appears, uniformed, professional, trained to balance trays and pour wine without spilling a drop despite the train's constant motion. He presents you with a leather-bound menu featuring a dozen appetizers, 8 entrees, 6 desserts, and a wine list that would do credit to any Manhattan restaurant. You might order fresh oysters on the half shell, followed by cream of celery soup, a Caesar salad, roasted duck with orange glaze, asparagus with hollandaise, and finish with baked Alaska flambéed tableside. Every dish is prepared in a kitchen no larger than a standard walk-in closet by a crew working over coal-fired ranges that require constant attention to maintain even temperatures. The head chef oversees multiple preparations simultaneously, coordinating with his sous chefs and kitchen assistants, while the entire workspace sways and vibrates. Timing is everything. If the soup is ready before the salad course is finished, it will cool. If the duck overcooks while the train takes a curve, the dish is ruined. There are no second chances, no margin for error. And yet, meal after meal, day after day, these crews delivered excellence. The secrets lay in meticulous planning and iron discipline. Each dining car operated according to precise protocols developed over decades. Ingredients were loaded at designated stations: fresh meat in Chicago, dairy products in Pittsburgh, produce in Albany. Walk-in refrigerators lined with ice kept perishables cold, though the ice melted and needed constant replenishment. Dry goods were stored in pantries designed to prevent shifting during motion. Every pot, pan, plate, and utensil had its designated place, secured against sudden jolts. The kitchen staff worked in military precision. The head chef, often called the steward, planned menus days in advance, coordinating with provisioning agents at stations along the route. He knew exactly how many passengers would board at each stop, allowing him to estimate meal counts with remarkable accuracy. His crew began prep work hours before each meal service, chopping vegetables, preparing stocks, measuring ingredients. When service began, they moved like dancers in an incredibly choreographed ballet, each person knowing exactly what needed to happen and when. The waiters, meanwhile, performed their own complex dance. They had to move through narrow aisles carrying laden trays while the train swayed. They learned to anticipate curves and jolts, shifting their weight and adjusting their balance with practiced ease. Spilling was considered a mark of incompetence. The best waiters could pour wine or coffee with one hand while holding a tray of dishes with the other, all without splashing a drop. These weren't just jobs, they were crafts, requiring years of training and immense pride. Many dining car workers were African-American Pullman porters and waiters who transformed these positions into respected professions. Despite facing systemic racism and discrimination, these men and women brought dignity, skill, and excellence to their work. They memorized passengers' preferences, anticipated needs before they were voiced, and maintained composure under pressures that would break lesser professionals. Their service was legendary, and many passengers requested specific waiters or stewards by name when booking their journeys. The 1930s brought new innovations that elevated dining car service even further. Air conditioning arrived, transforming the summer dining experience from sweltering endurance tests into cool, comfortable affairs. Modern refrigeration replaced ice-based systems, allowing longer storage of perishables and more complex menus. Electric ranges offered more precise temperature control than coal-fired stoves. Streamlined train designs reduced sway and vibration, making the waiters' jobs marginally easier. And the trains got faster. By the late 1930s, the race for passengers had become a race for perfection. Airlines were still noisy, cold, and unreliable. Automobiles were getting better, but highways weren't yet built for fast, uninterrupted travel. For long distances, the premier American passenger trains still ruled, and their dining cars became the crown jewels of that empire. Nowhere was this more evident than on the great name trains of the 1940s. The Santa Fe's Super Chief, Southern Pacific's Coast Daylight, Union Pacific's Los Angeles Limited, the New York Central's 20th Century Limited, and the Pennsylvania Railroad's Broadway Limited. Each railroad had its own personality, its own aesthetic, its own flavor, but in the dining car, they all shared the same mission: to deliver a restaurant experience that felt impossible for something moving across the map at express speed. Imagine an evening in 1941 aboard the Super Chief, crossing the high desert of New Mexico. Outside, the sky is deep indigo, the last light fading behind distant mesas. Inside the dining car, everything glows. Brass railings and chrome trim catch reflections from shaded lamps. The tables are freshly laid, white linen, heavy silverware, hotel-grade china bearing the railroad's logo, and a small bud vase with a single flower that somehow remains upright despite the constant motion. The maitre d' has already memorized the passenger list. He knows that in the corner, a Hollywood actor traveling under a slightly altered name prefers his steak medium rare and his coffee strong. He knows that the couple at table 4 boarded in Chicago on their honeymoon, and that this dinner is the highlight of their trip. He knows that the businessman at table 7 prefers to eat quickly and return to his compartment to review documents, and that the family at table 9 will need a children's portion of chicken and mashed potatoes. Behind the narrow door, the kitchen is already at full throttle. The head chef calls out orders in a calm, controlled voice. He has perhaps 8 burners, a grill, 2 ovens, a small prep counter, a narrow aisle, and 3 or 4 cooks who somehow manage to move past one another without collision. Pans hiss with butter and meat juices. Stocks simmer in heavy pots. Bread warms in the oven. A line of plates waits under heat lamps, each one timed to the second so that nothing reaches the dining room lukewarm. On tonight's menu, fresh Gulf shrimp cocktail, cream of mushroom soup, a small mixed salad, broiled lamb chops, roast prime rib, pan-fried rainbow trout, buttered new potatoes, string beans almondine, and for dessert, apple pie a la mode, chocolate layer cake, and baked custard. Coffee is brewed strong, tea is steeped properly, not tepid water poured over a reluctant bag, but full-bodied and aromatic. For those who want something stronger, the bar stocks bourbon, rye, gin, and imported wines. None of this is frozen airplane food reheated in plastic trays. This is real cooking, made to order, on a moving train. at a time when many small-town restaurants would have struggled to match the quality. The magic lies in preparation as much as in performance. Before the train ever left Chicago, purchasing agents, commissary workers, and provisioning crews engaged in a precise ballet of their own. Contracts with meat suppliers ensured that prime cuts were delivered to the railroad's commissary kitchens on schedule. Produce came from regional farms, carefully inspected and selected. Dry goods, flour, sugar, coffee, spices were portioned and packed into labeled containers sized exactly for the journey's needs. In large urban terminals, railroads maintained huge commissary facilities that operated almost like factories. There, bakers turned out loaves of bread, rolls, and pastries destined for dozens of dining cars departing each day. Butchers broke down sides of beef and lamb into standardized cuts. Sauces, stocks, and base preparations were made in bulk, then transferred to the dining car kitchen staff to be finished and plated on board. Everything was catalogued, counted, and loaded with the precision of a military operation. Once the train was underway, resupply became part of the choreography. At designated stops, station crews would roll carts out to the dining cars and transfer fresh ice, milk, cream, eggs, and sometimes additional meat or produce. The process often had to be completed in minutes. The train could not afford to linger. A delay at one station could cascade into missed meets with other trains, angry passengers, and fines from state regulators. Yet through all of this, the expectation remained. The dining, car-served breakfast, lunch, and dinner on time, with the quality of a fine restaurant. And then there was the human element. Most passengers never saw the full complexity of the staff hierarchy that kept the diner running. At the top was the steward, part maitre d', part accountant, part diplomat, and part disciplinarian. He managed the dining car's finances, supervised the waiters and kitchen staff, handled passenger complaints, and ensured that every plate served met the railroad's standards. He was trained to recognize regular customers, remember names, and make subtle status distinctions without appearing snobbish. Below the steward, the waiters formed the public face of the operation. Many were black men who, in an era of segregation and limited opportunity, turned railway service into a profession that offered steady pay and the chance to travel the country. Their uniforms were immaculate, pressed jackets, polished shoes, crisp shirts, and often bow ties. They moved with the smooth, controlled energy of stage performers. All was visible, but never intrusive. A good waiter could handle an entire section of the dining car, keeping track of who was on which course, who needed coffee refills, and who preferred another glass of wine. They had to time their movements with the motion of the train, anticipate sudden sways, and compensate by shifting their weight. Over time, their bodies learned the rhythms of the rail, the gentle rocking on straight track, the subtle warning that signaled an upcoming curve, the slight change in sound that preceded a slowdown. Behind them, busboys quietly cleared plates, refreshed bread baskets, refilled water glasses, and reset tables with practiced efficiency. Dishwashers, often working in conditions of heat and steam, kept a constant flow of clean plates, cups, and silverware moving back into circulation. Every piece of equipment, every action, every movement was part of a system designed to deliver the illusion of effortless elegance. In truth, it was anything but effortless. The 1940s added an entirely new dimension: war. When the United States entered World War II in 1941, the railroads became essential arteries of the war effort. Troops, supplies, and equipment all moved by train. Many of the same dining cars that had once served leisurely steaks and wines to businessmen and families now found themselves feeding entire companies of soldiers in transit. Men in uniform filled every coach, every sleeper, every berth. The diners remained open almost around the clock. Menus changed. Wartime rationing limited access to certain meats, fats, and luxury items. Butter gave way to margarine in some recipes. Coffee was rationed. Sugar supplies fluctuated. Yet, even under these constraints, the dining car crews worked to maintain standards. Soldiers might not receive the same elaborate 5-course meals as peacetime first-class passengers, but they still got hot, freshly prepared food, often far better than anything available in field kitchens. Railroads adopted new strategies to cope with the demand. Some ran troop trains with simplified menus and high-density seating. Others repurposed existing diners, removing decorative elements to make space for more tables. But even in this stripped-down form, the discipline and precision of dining car operations remained. The kitchen crew still had to feed dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people within narrow time windows, dictated by schedules and track availability. For many soldiers, their first experience of seeing the wider country came through a dining car window. A young man from Ohio might board a train in Cincinnati, eat breakfast while crossing the Mississippi, have lunch while rolling through the plains of Kansas, and eat dinner as the Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance. The meal itself, hot coffee, eggs, fresh bread, perhaps bacon or ham, became part of a larger sensory experience. The smell of steel and steam, the rhythm of the tracks, the murmur of conversation. In that sense, the dining car served not just food, but memory. When the war ended, the railroads hoped to convert wartime necessity into peacetime prosperity. They invested heavily in new streamlined trains with names that promised speed, modernity, and glamour. The City of Los Angeles, the North Coast Limited, the Silver Meteor, the Coast Daylight. These trains featured sleek stainless steel dining cars with curved lines, picture windows, and interiors that combined traditional elegance with modern design. The kitchens were upgraded with better refrigeration, electric or oil-fired ranges, and improved ventilation. Air conditioning made summer travel far more bearable. Lighting design emphasized warmth and intimacy, with indirect fixtures and shaded lamps that created pools of light on each table, while leaving the edges of the car in gentle shadow. Carpets were chosen not only for appearance, but for their ability to muffle sound. Everything was designed to make the dining experience feel like a retreat from the mechanical reality just beyond the walls. Menus evolved with the times. In the late 1940s, a typical dinner on a Premier train still offered hearty, traditional fare: roast beef, chicken, fish, potatoes, vegetables, soups, and salads. But regional influences started to appear more prominently. On Western routes, diners featured trout from mountain streams, steaks from local ranches, and even Mexican-inspired dishes. The Santa Fe's Super Chief was particularly known for incorporating southwestern flavors into its menus, reflecting the landscapes it crossed. Railroads printed beautifully designed menus that passengers often kept as souvenirs. Some featured artwork showcasing the train itself. Others illustrated landmarks along the route. Collecting these menus became a hobby for some travelers. Decades later, historians would use them to reconstruct not only what people ate on trains, but how railroads imagined their own brands. Through it all, the fundamental challenge remained unchanged. How do you serve multi-course meals at near-restaurant quality, inside a metal tube that never stops moving, at speeds that now approached 90 or even 100 miles per hour? On a technical level, top speed mattered less than ride quality. However, as locomotives grew more powerful and schedules tightened, trains spent more time running at high sustained speeds. This translated into more frequent vibrations, more pronounced lateral movement, and more intense braking and acceleration cycles. For the dining car staff, these were not abstract engineering concerns. They were practical hazards. A saucepan full of hot stock could slosh dangerously if the engineer applied the brakes too sharply. Plates on a prep counter might slide if the train hit a rough patch of track. A waiter carrying a tray laden with soup bowls had to learn how to tilt his body just enough to counter each motion. Training manuals and internal memos emphasized coordination between crew members and even between the dining car and the locomotive crew. In practice, experienced staff developed an almost intuitive sense of what the train was about to do. They listened. They listened to the change in sound when the locomotive eased off the throttle or applied it more aggressively. They felt the slight lateral tug that preceded a curve. They anticipated the subtle deceleration as the train approached a station or a passing siding. Over time, the best waiters could tell, without looking out a window, whether they were on straight track, on a curve, climbing a grade, or descending. They learned when it was safe to carry full trays and when it was wiser to wait a few seconds. The passengers, mostly, never noticed this choreography. They experienced only the result: meals that arrived hot and beautifully plated, coffee that rarely spilled, and a dining room that felt steady and composed, even as the countryside blurred past at a mile a minute. In an age before airline lounges, airport restaurants, and highway rest stops, the dining car occupied a unique place in American life. It was a moving crossroads where people from different regions and classes shared the same space, if not always the same table. Politicians, entertainers, businessmen, families, newlyweds, and soldiers on leave all sat under the same ceiling, watched by the same staff, fed from the same kitchen. For some, it was a rare taste of luxury. A traveling salesman from a small town might never have eaten in a fine restaurant before boarding a train. The simple act of ordering from a printed menu, being served by uniformed staff, and eating on real china with heavy silverware could feel like a step into another world. Children gaped at the white-jacketed waiters and the array of dishes. Elderly passengers, many of whom had seen the rise of the railroads from their earliest days, marveled at how far things had come from the rough, noisy, uncomfortable trains of their youth. For others, the dining car became an extension of their existing social habits. Businessmen treated clients to meals in private booths or at carefully chosen tables. Couples celebrated anniversaries with train-board dinners that rivaled anything on land. Writers and artists observed fellow passengers and collected impressions that later found their way into novels and paintings. By the late 1940s, the dining car had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a symbol of motion, of modernity, of a particular kind of American elegance. But beneath that elegance, cracks were beginning to show. Operating costs were rising fast. Labor contracts, ingredient prices, and the expense of maintaining heavily used kitchen equipment all ate into railroad profits. At the same time, competition from automobiles and airlines was beginning to bite. Highways were improving. Planes were getting faster, safer, and more comfortable. Travelers who once defaulted to trains now had real alternatives. Railroads found themselves in an uncomfortable position. Dining cars were among their most beloved amenities and among their biggest financial liabilities. In internal reports and board meetings, executives acknowledged a harsh truth. For many railroads, the dining car was losing money on every meal served. Some studies estimated that by the late 1930s and into the 1940s, trains were losing close to $1, or even more, for each dinner they sold, after accounting for labor, food, and overhead. Yet almost none of them dared to get rid of the diners. The dining car was not simply a revenue-generating unit. It was a marketing tool, a symbol of prestige. Railroad advertisements featured illustrations of smiling couples in evening dress, seated at tables by large windows, waiters hovering nearby. Brochures described the quality of the food and service in almost reverent tones. Travel writers raved about the experience of eating fine meals while watching the American landscape roll by. In other words, railroads considered dining cars a necessary loss leader. Even if the diner did not make money directly, it helped sell tickets, not merely coach fares, but higher-priced Pullman accommodations. A passenger might choose one train over another because he or she preferred the dining car menu, the decor, or even the reputation of the coffee. For a time, prestige mattered as much as profit. But the tension between those two forces, the desire to maintain luxury and the pressure to cut costs, would only grow stronger in the years ahead. The 1940s were the peak years, the era when the system had matured, but not yet begun to crumble, when the illusion of effortless grace still held firm. Passengers sitting in those softly lit dining rooms, savoring steaks and fine desserts as the train rushed across the night, had no way of knowing how fragile that world had already become. They only knew that, for a few hours, they occupied a space that felt impossibly refined, a restaurant where the floor moved, the scenery changed by the minute, and the entire enterprise depended on people and systems working together with near-perfect coordination. A 5-course meal at 100 miles per hour was not just a feat of engineering or hospitality. It was a fragile miracle, repeated thousands of times across thousands of miles, every single day. And like all miracles, it would not last forever. The 1950s arrived with a sense of optimism, tinged with unease. America was prosperous, confident, and eager to embrace the future. A future that seemed increasingly likely to be found in the sky and on the highways, rather than on the rails. For a few years, the illusion held. The great name trains still rolled across the continent, their dining cars still glowing with warm light and white linen. The Super Chief continued to ferry Hollywood stars across the Southwest. The 20th Century Limited still raced from New York to Chicago with clockwork precision. The California Zephyr still carried passengers through the Rockies in its Vista Dome cars, where they dined while watching the mountains rise like monuments beyond the glass. But behind the scenes, the arithmetic was becoming impossible to ignore. By 1950, most railroads were losing money on every meal they served. One study from the era estimated that the average dining car meal cost the railroad approximately $1.50 to produce and serve, but was sold to passengers for only 75 cents. The difference had to be absorbed by the railroad, justified as a marketing expense. For decades, this arrangement had been tolerable because passenger trains generated enough overall revenue to cover the losses. Now that revenue was evaporating. Automobiles had become faster, more reliable, and far more affordable. Highways, once patchy and inconsistent, were being replaced by smooth, modern expressways. Families could pile into their own car, set their own schedules, stop when they wanted, and drive directly to their destination without transfers or timetables. The freedom was intoxicating. And then there were the airlines. Commercial aviation had existed since the 1920s, but it remained a niche market for the wealthy and the adventurous. Planes were noisy, cold, prone to delays, and sometimes dangerous. Most people still preferred trains. But by the early 1950s, jet engines were being introduced. Cabin pressurization was becoming standard, and airlines were expanding their route networks with aggressive marketing campaigns. What had once taken 2 days by train could now be accomplished in a few hours by air. For business travelers, the calculation was simple. Time was money, and jets saved time. Why spend 2 nights on a train when you could fly coast to coast in 5 hours and be back in your office the next morning? The convenience was undeniable, even if the in-flight meal consisted of a lukewarm sandwich and coffee in a paper cup. Railroads tried to compete. They introduced faster schedules, more luxurious amenities, and elaborate advertising campaigns. They emphasized the romance of rail travel, the beauty of the scenery, the quality of the dining car meals. Some of these campaigns were effective. Certain trains, particularly those with scenic routes like the California Zephyr, continued to attract passengers willing to pay for the experience rather than just the transportation. But for most routes, it was a losing battle. Passenger numbers declined year after year. Trains that had once run with full dining cars now operated half-empty. Kitchen staff prepared elaborate meals for just a handful of diners. The economics became brutal. Railroads petitioned regulatory agencies for permission to discontinue unprofitable routes, trim services, or eliminate dining cars altogether. The regulators, mindful of the public's attachment to trains and concerned about communities that depended on rail service, resisted. They required railroads to maintain service levels even as losses mounted. This created a toxic cycle. Railroads lost money, cut back where they could, service quality declined, passengers fled to cars and planes, and losses deepened further. The dining car became a symbol of this decline. Where once the diner had been a place of pride and prestige, it now represented an anachronism, a beautiful, expensive, impractical relic of a fading era. Menus were simplified. Fresh ingredients gave way to frozen and prepackaged items. The white-jacketed waiters who had once served with military precision were replaced by smaller crews working longer hours. Tables that had gleamed with polished silverware now featured cheaper flatware and paper napkins. The carpets wore thin, the upholstery faded, the brass dulled. By the early 1960s, some railroads had given up entirely. Dining cars were replaced with grill cars or tavern lounges that offered sandwiches, burgers, and drinks. Fast food rather than fine dining. Other trains eliminated food service altogether, relying on brief station stops where passengers could grab a snack from a vending machine. For the trains that still operated full dining cars, the experience had changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. The menus were shorter, the portions were smaller. The service, while still professional, lacked the polish and confidence of earlier decades. The staff knew they were presiding over a slow-motion collapse, and it showed in their eyes. Yet, even in decline, there were moments of grace. A passenger traveling on the Silver Meteor in 1965 might still experience a hint of the old magic. The dining car, though showing its age, still offered a proper meal: shrimp cocktail, a salad, roast chicken with vegetables, a slice of pie. The waiter, a veteran of 30 years on the rails, still moved with practiced ease, compensating for the sway of the train with unconscious adjustments. Outside the window, the Florida coast slid past in the golden light of early evening. For that passenger, the experience might have felt timeless, a brief connection to an era when travel was about more than just getting from point A to point B. It was about the journey itself, the rituals, the small pleasures. The dining car, even in its diminished state, still offered that. But time was running out. In 1970, the federal government stepped in to prevent the complete collapse of American passenger rail. The creation of Amtrak consolidated most remaining intercity passenger services under a single, quasi-public entity. The goal was to preserve a baseline level of passenger rail service while relieving private railroads of the financial burden. Amtrak inherited a fleet of aging equipment, demoralized staff, and declining ridership. It also inherited the dining car tradition, though in a much reduced form. Some routes retained full dining cars with sit-down service. Others shifted to simplified cafe cars. Standards varied wildly. On some trains, you could still order a proper meal served on china with metal utensils. On others, you got a microwaved sandwich in a plastic container. The glory days were over, but the memory persisted. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as Amtrak struggled to define its mission and secure funding, a curious thing happened. People began to look back on the golden age of rail travel with nostalgia and longing. Books were published, celebrating the great name trains of the past. Museums began preserving historic railroad equipment, including dining cars like Pullman Car 3164, which had entered service in 1925 and continued operating through the 1940s and beyond, before being restored and preserved. Enthusiasts formed clubs dedicated to railroad history. They collected menus, photographs, and stories from the dining car era. Some even organized charter trains that recreated the experience of luxury rail travel, complete with period-appropriate meals served on vintage china. These trips were expensive and rare, but they sold out quickly. People wanted to taste, even briefly, what their parents and grandparents had known. What was it that drew them? Perhaps it was the elegance, the sense that travel could be something more than a chore to be endured. Perhaps it was the human element, the skilled waiters, the dedicated chefs, the crews who worked in impossible conditions to deliver something approaching perfection. Perhaps it was the romance of motion itself, the idea of sitting in a warm, well-lit room, surrounded by comfort and companionship, while the world rushed past outside. Or perhaps it was something simpler, the recognition that certain things, once lost, can never quite be replicated. Today, dining cars still exist in limited form. Amtrak operates dining service on some of its long-distance routes, though the experience varies widely. On trains like the Coast Starlight or the Empire Builder, you can still sit in a dining car, order from a menu, and eat while the scenery unfolds. The food is competent, sometimes even good, but it lacks the ambition and refinement of the 1940s heyday. Internationally, a few luxury trains carry on the tradition with greater fidelity. The Venice Simplon Orient Express in Europe, the Belmond Royal Scotsman, and similar heritage trains offer meticulously recreated dining experiences that evoke the Golden Age. These trains cater to tourists willing to pay premium prices for a taste of history. The food is excellent, the service impeccable, the atmosphere enchanting. But these are rarities, accessible only to a privileged few. For most people, the dining car exists now only in memory, photographs, and stories passed down through generations. But the legacy endures. The dining car represents more than just a mode of food service. It stands as a reminder of an era when America invested in elegance, when craftsmanship and service were valued, when travel was designed to be enjoyed rather than merely endured. It reminds us that logistics and technology, no matter how impressive, are only tools. What matters is how they are used and to what end. The men and women who worked in those dining cars, chefs, waiters, stewards, dishwashers, busboys, performed a kind of everyday magic. They took raw ingredients, cramped kitchens, and constantly moving floors, and transformed them into experiences that passengers remembered for the rest of their lives. They did this not with advanced technology or vast resources, but with skill, discipline, and pride. In an age of airline snack boxes, highway fast food, and microwaved meals, the dining car reminds us that things were not always this way. There was a time when a 5-course meal at 100 miles per hour was not a fantasy, but a fact, repeated thousands of times, on thousands of trains, across millions of miles. It was a fragile miracle, built on precision, coordination, and human excellence. And for a few precious decades, it worked. The rails are still there. The routes remain. A few trains still run, carrying passengers across the same landscapes that once rushed past those dining car windows. But the experience has changed. The elegance has faded. The magic has dimmed. What remains is memory, and the knowledge that, once upon a time, America knew how to do this right. April 24th, 1925. Pullman Car and Manufacturing Corporation, Chicago, Illinois. Dining car 3164 rolls off the assembly line, destined for a life of service that will span nearly half a century. The craftsmen who built it could not have known how the world would change. They could not have foreseen the rise of airlines, the construction of interstate highways, the decline of passenger rail, the slow fading of the era they were helping to create. They only knew that they were building something beautiful, something that would carry people across the country in comfort and style, something that mattered. And it did. For as long as it lasted, the dining car was more than a place to eat. It was a moving stage where strangers became fellow travelers, where meals became memories, where the journey itself became the destination. The trains have mostly stopped. The dining cars have been retired or repurposed. The waiters and chefs have long since hung up their uniforms. But the story endures. And every time someone reads a vintage menu, looks at a black and white photograph of a gleaming dining car interior, or listens to a grandparent's story about eating a 5-course meal while crossing the Rockies, the magic flickers back to life, if only for a moment. That is the true legacy of the dining car. Not the food, not the speed, not the elegance, but the reminder that travel, done right, can be an art form. And art, once created, never truly dies. It simply waits to be remembered.